Welcome back to the Mandarin Blueprint Podcast. My name is Phil Crimmins. Many of you may have noticed that we've switched to doing the podcast every 2 weeks. And the reason for this is just a few things have come up that have made us realize that doing it on a weekly basis is, a combination of unnecessary and also, sort of time consuming in the sense that we get back to people, pretty frequently throughout the week, oftentimes with recorded Loom videos, giving them a clear answer to their question. And so, when we run across things that haven't been answered before, we often give a pretty good video answer to people right away. So there's kind of like this sense of, well, why bother, doing it twice so often, especially when we're building a brand new course. So that's the other element of this, which is that we are building an immersion course. So the Mandarin Blueprint Method, as it stands currently, is the best solution for the active study element of acquiring a language. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in order to acquire a language, we all know you need comprehensible input. You need things that you can understand. But in order to get comprehensible input, you must immerse yourself in the language enough so that the opportunities to get comprehensible input are, numerous, to the point where any moment that you're paying attention, there's a possibility of getting some comprehensible input. And so what you need is to have active immersion, passive immersion, and active study, this triangle of stuff that you need to do to get fluent and literate in a language. Now, Chinese has this problem, which is that you can't read anything without learning characters. And so that takes away one of your major aids to getting comprehensible input. In order to get comprehensible input, you need to be able to open your eyes, see something, and have a chance to understand what that is. But if you can only do listening, then you're only getting about half of the possible comprehensible input. I guess I want to say comprehensible inputs, but you know what I'm saying? Like the opportunities to learn are only in the listening realm, which is pretty tough as it is. Like that's harder than reading in a lot of ways. But it's also just about half the story. And also when it comes to language acquisition, reading has been shown to be even more effective than listening, which is pretty surprising in a way, but it is true. And so you need to have an active study element to your learning in order to get the chance to be able to read and be able to understand that way. And so the Mandarin Blueprint Method teaches you 3,050 characters. We're eventually going to expand it out to 3,600, but it's the kind of thing where that is more than enough to be able to look at native content. You get opportunities to see words in context. You see the words in context, and you're sure that it's graded to your level with the Mandarin Blueprint Method. And so the active study element is completely built out. But the active immersion and the passive immersion element are something that, obviously anybody can try their best to immerse themselves in the language. But if you have motivational coaches along the way, you have new content offers brought to you every week, and there's things that are given to you that give you more chances to immerse yourself throughout the day, and you have the right attitudes, and you get frequently reminded of why you're doing this. You set your goals clearly, you set yourself up in a way so that you start to see Chinese as this constant game that happens throughout your life, not just in the moments when you're doing your active study, but any possible moment is an opportunity for learning and an opportunity to immerse yourself. And if you have all those resources available to you, you're going to have even more success. So we've realized that at this point, the best thing for us to do is to create this immersion coaching motivational course. And so that's what we're working on now. It's going to be a premium service. And the thing is, it's something that's totally possible to do on your own. So really, it's for people who want that extra help along the way and are willing to put in the extra resources now because they've decided, I am going to take Chinese to a level that's like so substantial that it's going to impact the rest of my life massively. And when you get to that point where you're like, I'm going to approach native fluency type of level, well, then that means that you've decided that Mandarin Chinese is one of the things that's worth investing, major parts of your life into, and therefore you're willing to spend a bit more, cash up front to get it going. So we're going to make it a premium service, and it's going to be something that will give you the three elements of Chinese all interacting together to make sure that you're getting the most out of your time. And so that 3 to 5 years from now, when you've been immersing yourself and getting your active study done and doing all these things that we recommend, you're going to be absolutely sick at Chinese. Very impressive, super marketable to anybody around you. And, we just want to make the course in such a way so that even when you're, 15 months in and you've been immersing yourself for 15 months and you've learned, 2,500 characters and you're just really smashing through the process of learning Chinese, you're still getting great recommendations from us and you're learning how to when do you move from the phase 1 to phase 2 of your immersion? We know about phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, phase 5 of how to do the active study element of your course, which is why we do the phases in the Mandarin Blueprint Method. But what about immersion? When do you know that you're ready to move from, say, simple kids TV shows with subtitles that are easy to understand to, say, something like simple, pure reading that is graded to your level, or maybe you move on to some audio that's simple but is understandable, or maybe you move to some TV shows without subtitles because, there's sort of stages to how you immerse yourself to make it more likely to be comprehensible. And so this is all just to say that this is our big new project that we're working on. And we do have some updates, though, around the actual active study course. So as many of you know, the advanced course and the upper intermediate course are being previewed by the lifetime members right now. We've actually already had some maniacs finish the upper intermediate course, which is pretty cool. That means they know at least 2,000 characters now. And we're in the process of adding more of the contextual content to that. So if we unlock certain characters, then we will add in the words and the sentences that go along with those words that are graded to your level and all of that. But certainly by the time you reach the upper intermediate course, you're good enough at Chinese to be able to just focus on the characters and then maybe double back and check out some more of the stuff that we put in there. But the characters become your main focus at that point. And the only reason we haven't released to the public yet is because we decided that we're going to switch up the way that we present sentences. And so closed deletes are what we've been using so far, and that's where you have a sentence and there's a character missing in the sentence, and you're supposed to produce that character and say, okay, I understand the sentence and I produced the missing character. Now this has, I suppose some advantages, but there's actually a meta disadvantage, which is that it takes you longer to go through any given sentence. And so really the best type of sentence to have is a purely comprehension sentence. Just read the sentence and comprehend the keyword in the sentence. So if I say, 我在中国几年了，已经认识好多朋友, right? And the highlighted word is 认识. Then you're reading it and you're going, okay, the point of this is to say, I know that the word 认识 means to become acquainted with or to know in that sense. And but I still also understood it in the sentence. And so you're getting the sort of like, I'm learning the word, but I'm also getting it in a sentence. And you can move through this type of flashcard more quickly. So we've decided to change all of our sentence flashcards to this format. And in order to get those all inside of our new Traverse flashcard software, we just a bit of a time-consuming process because we have so many sentences. And so therefore, we are what we're doing to make that work more quickly is just waiting to get. It's not to say we do it more quickly. What we're trying to do here is to make the sentences in Traverse all there before we open up the upper intermediate course and the advanced course to the public. Because once we introduce it to the public, then that means that we're going to have Traverse for the upper intermediate course and advanced course. And to anybody who was already in the course, they can either keep using Anki for the previous courses, phases 1 through 5 in the intermediate course, or they can switch over to Traverse. And if they switch over to Traverse, the sentences need to be there. So at the moment, the sentences are not there because we're changing the format. So until we get the sentences up between levels 13 and 58 on Traverse, we're not going to release it to the public yet, to the people who are just subscribers. But that's on its way. the sentences are already changed and ready. We just need to import them, and Dominic's helping us find a way to do it a bit faster than, at the moment, if we were going to import them, we'd have to take all 8,000 of them and drag and drop, and it would take a really long time. But he's working on a mechanism to help us do it a bit faster. So once that's ready to go, we will release the upper intermediate course and advanced course to subscribers, and that way you can get access to them as well. And if you are a full bundle owner, which is somebody who basically bought the previous courses, we'll have a special offer for you to buy the upper intermediate and advanced courses, or you can just become a subscriber to get access to them for the period of time that you're going to use them. So those are your options there. And so that's what's going on at the moment with the course, the active study course, our plans for the immersion course. We also have this plan, which is pretty exciting. So I'm going to talk to Yo Lao Shi, who is the professor I had at Sichuan University, who was just the man. He was really good at explaining characters and showing how they relate to other Chinese characters, kind of giving a very clear representation of how the characters work on a very deep level. And so, as a result of that, we are going to get him to get involved in the intermediate course. Well, it's going to be a separate course, but we're going to have the Yo Lao Shi course, which gives a deeper understanding of characters when they've already become mature. So imagine that you've done the foundation course, you've learned 592 characters, right? And then we start to introduce what are called vocab boosts in the intermediate course. Now, the vocab boosts in the intermediate course are all words that are based on foundation course characters, but then are used in they're like medium to low frequency words. So like even though they're made up of foundation course characters, they're not the highest frequency words. You learned those in the foundation course. They're more mid frequency words. And so that's the perfect opportunity to deepen your knowledge of the characters from the foundation course, and you'll also understand, what the heck he's talking about, because the characters won't be brand new to you. If you're trying to learn about, how great a certain character is in certain contexts, but it's the first time you're learning the character, it can be a bit overwhelming. So if you've never seen the character before, and then Yo Lao Shi goes on and talks about how all the different ways you can use it, yes, it'll be very interesting, but you didn't have the foundation of already knowing it. Whereas if you do it in the way I'm describing, where he brings it up in the vocab boosts in the intermediate course, for sure, you've already seen these characters a few times, you have a relationship with them, and you're taking it a step deeper, and you're understanding it even further. And like, you're going to get to the point where you see it used in this different context so often that it can be really, excellent for your sort of deeper knowledge of characters. So, it's possible to like look at a character and go several layers deep into its etymology and how it got used in different words and all of that. But if you're doing that too early, it's going to mostly just go over your head. And so this is the perfect opportunity for that. So we're going to talk to him about getting a course going with him as the sort of main character in the courses, and that's going to be great because he is excellent. The courses will be in Chinese, so it'll be a form of immersion as well. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. You guys are going to like Yo Lao Shi. And, so there's some really exciting stuff coming down the pipeline when it comes to the Mandarin Blueprint Method, the immersion course we have coming up, the course with Yo Lao Shi. It's all very exciting stuff. So that in mind, let's get into this week's comments and emails. First, we have an email from Liam, and he says, "Hey guys, I finished your course recently. Thank you so much for putting it all together." And yeah, he's leaving this comment on the level 58 review, which is the final level of the intermediate course. At this point, he's learned 1,564 characters and many of the words, but you'll see what he gets into here. He says, "At around level 48, I stopped learning words for the course and just learned the characters. Using your method, I've also learned some more characters than are on the intermediate course while I wait for the advanced course. I know around 2,000 characters now, and can pick up any fiction book and recognize almost all the characters. Is this reality?" I use Link, which you guys recommended, and it really helps with quickly looking up words and saving them for later reviews in Anki. I don't know most of the words, but I'm slowly learning them, and they seem to stick better due to reading them in context. Another of your useful tips. This is only the beginning of the journey, but as Aristotle and my wise father like to say, the beginning is more than half of the whole. Just wanted to thank you guys again for making all of this possible. You're making many people's dreams come true. And for anyone looking ahead, know that with consistency and enjoyment to guide you, you can do it as well. Thanks again. Well, Liam, this is a fantastic achievement on your part. Knowing 2,000 characters is, of course, huge. Link is super helpful. If you don't know what link.com is, it's lingq.com. And it's a service that is a little bit tougher for beginners to use because it's sort of like you don't know anything. So if you put a wall of text in there for Chinese, it's a bit too top down. But when you're at the end of the intermediate course, it starts to become super helpful. So essentially, you can take any piece of text and copy and paste it into Link. It will analyze it, and it's not quite perfect how it analyzes it. Sometimes it puts the border between words a little bit wrong, as all Chinese text analyzers do. But generally, it's pretty on point. And it will say, okay, if a word is highlighted in blue, that means that you haven't, according to Link, learned it yet. But suppose you were reading something that was like a Mandarin Blueprint piece of text, and you'd learned it completely. You already know everything that it means. Then if you hit next page, then all of the blue stuff will get marked as known. And so it's very gamey. It's very game theory-like because your word count keeps going up and up and up, and you have more and more opportunities to learn, and it's quite enjoyable. But if you run into something you don't know, you can click on the word, turn it yellow, and then get a definition right there. So it's like if you're reading just a book, which of course we would never say don't read a book. Like if you have a hard copy book around, like it's good to just leave them around. But if you don't know a word, it's not like you can click on it and see the definition pop up and then save it potentially to be used as a flashcard in the future. So Link is very helpful in that way, and it's super helpful for intermediate learners. So again, lingq.com, a service we highly recommend if you're past, the foundation course even. And also this point, the beginning is more than half of the whole. I completely get what this is about. So much of the process of learning Chinese, especially in active study, but also in immersion and all of that, is just starting. Here's a simple tip. This is a great tip. This comes from Matt versus Japan. So what Matt did when he was learning Japanese was he would set, he had this routine of he would have his morning shower, and as he's getting dressed getting out of the shower, he would take a pair of headphones, wired headphones, and put them under his shirt, hanging, so that the top of the headphones hang down by his, just by his chest, right? And he turns on his playlist, his immersion playlist, and he just always keeps it on 100% of the time. And if he needs to do something, he'll take his headphones out and just let them dangle there, but they'll stay on, right? And that's nice because it doesn't bother people who are around. But when the room gets silent and you say, you were just talking to somebody and you took your headphones out for that reason, and then what you did was you decided to you were speaking to them for a moment, and then they leave. Then the room becomes silent, and you hear the audio playing because the silent room now, there's nothing impeding it, so you can hear the audio playing, and you just pop one or two of the headphones back in, and you have opportunities to immerse yourself again. A simple thing to do, but it's the kind of thing that if you just start that at the beginning of the day, that was the biggest challenge in a way, right? It's just getting the habit going. And then if every day for a year, you got up every morning, took a shower, and put the headphones on and turned it on and left them there or put them in your ear or whatever. Think about how many hours you will end up listening to Chinese throughout the year just because you built that simple habit, right? So that's the type of thing that the beginning is more than half of the whole is trying to express. And this applies to pretty much anything. Did you set up language learning with Netflix? Did you set up link.com? Did you set up your flashcards to be done at a certain time of day that you pour your coffee and you start to do your flashcards? Did you set up these habits? Did you give your environment a chance to give you opportunities to learn, especially in the early days? Gosh, concrete nouns are so we say in a flashcard, add a picture to your flashcard. Well, suppose you just put Post-its all around your house on all of the concrete nouns you can find, and try to get even like really meticulous with it. It's like, okay, here's a wall. Here's a corner of a wall. Here's the electrical socket. Here's a door. Here's the handle on the door. Here's the key hole in the door. Here's the handle of the closet, right? Like, it's like, try to get very specific. And that's just nouns, obviously. That does, it's just one element of the language. But that's the type of thing where the thing that you did at the beginning, where you went around with Post-it notes, ends up being half of the whole, because really, like, the whole is all the times that you saw it. You saw that, the various things and their names were what they were. Okay, yeah, this is the, 衣柜的把手. Right, that's the wardrobe handle, right? And so you've seen it enough, and that's your whole there. So once again, congratulations to Liam for getting this far, and let's move on to the next comment from John CRAMER on navigating Phase 1 level reviews, and he's responding to a previous comment from Luke in the previous podcast. So he says, "Thanks for the shout out, Luke. By the way, I want to share with you and Phil that Mandarin is my 7th language to learn and acquire. I grew up speaking English and Greek, then studied Spanish, Italian in school, and minored in German in college. I studied in Austria and lived in Germany for many years and achieved fluency in German. While in Europe, I also learned some French on my own, though I am not fluent. I've tried various methods to learn foreign languages: books, recordings, tutors, classroom instruction, movies and TV shows, and most recently, YouTube. But, by far, the Mandarin Blueprint Method is the most effective way I've discovered in learning Chinese. An additional benefit to this method is that it has also reinforced my understanding of other languages. For example, I can use words and concepts from other languages to form mnemonic connections, which I can't do in English, and these connections reinforce my conscious recall of words and phrases in different languages, especially since I do not use them every day. So keep expanding the blueprint and designing new products. I am digging this method. Thank you to Luke and Phil." Well, John, we're delighted to be able to do this type of thing, and that's fantastic, knowing 7 languages. I mean, sure, maybe not absolutely fluent in all of them, but isn't it cool how knowing multiple languages can reinforce your knowledge of, like, so if I go to learn Spanish, I'm for sure going to associate a lot of Spanish with Chinese, because that will serve 2 purposes. It'll give me one connection that's, more mnemonic connections that I can use to remember certain things in Spanish, but it will also reinforce my Chinese. So, like, I'm going to be moving to the States next year, and I actually probably will learn Spanish because I'm going to be living in Texas, so I will be, relatively close to the Mexican border. I'm sure there'll be a lot of Spanish speakers around, so I'm going to learn Spanish. And in that time, since I'll be in the States, I will have fewer opportunities to speak Chinese. It won't be none, because there are Chinese people all over the world, but as a result, I'll want to keep a hold of my Chinese knowledge, right? And so one of the ways to do that when I'm learning Spanish will be to associate lots of new words with the Chinese language. So that's pretty cool. I'm very excited for that. And remember, John, that like the other methods that you were using to learn languages, especially TV shows, movies, and YouTube, that's still like one of the best ways you can learn. What Mandarin Blueprint does with the active study is that we increase your opportunities to learn. The most basic way we do that is by teaching you how to read. So if you can read, then suddenly the entire world of text becomes open to you. But it's more than just that, because you can imagine it like you're immersing yourself and you're constantly getting input, but much of it is incomprehensible input. But the further you go into Mandarin Blueprint, the more things you notice. You go, oh yeah, I learned that in Mandarin Blueprint. He was saying shangmian there, and I remember I learned shangmian, xiamian, and qianmian, and homian, and like I learned all those directional mians, and then so I heard somebody talking about it, and I picked that up, and like there's so many things you can pick up along the way. So the active study is essentially the mechanism by which your immersion becomes more comprehensible, but it's nonetheless the immersion where the real like clicks happen. And so, Mandarin Blueprint's great, and it's obviously going to help you get more out of your immersion. But remember, immersion's where you really get good. So keep that stuff up. Keep the movies and TV shows and all that good stuff going. Now let's look at Kolia on level 22 complete. He says, I'm currently on a 21-inch screen, and the all words section of the overall character and word learning progress page pretty much fills the whole of it now. It looks massive, smiley face. I passed HSK3 many years ago, so I supposedly knew much of it already, but now I know that I knew nothing at the time. Now I know these 307 characters up to the stroke orders. This is amazing. And life in China actually became even more enjoyable. Any Chinese written on a wall becomes immediately an opportunity to identify props in them, and they don't look indecipherable anymore. Quite the opposite. You can be proud of your work. You're going to unlock so many Chinese speakers over time. Thank you. Yeah, this is a great moment for Kolia here because, we've definitely had a fair few people who started with the, they started their Chinese journeys with already knowing a fair bit about Chinese. They've passed the HSK3. They've done some type of learning before. But there's this thing that always happens when you do this. If you were doing it with the wrong methods, or at least methods that weren't wholly effective, then you're going to end up with this feeling of like, am I making progress? I can't tell. I mean, I think I learned this thing, but I don't know. Then I forgot this other thing that I used to know. And like, it can be very, 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back, and that type of thing. It can feel like that a lot of the time. And so what we had hoped to do with Mandarin Blueprint was, of course, create something for beginners, but also create something for people with beginner's mind. So where they go, okay, let me go back and see what I can fix about my previous Chinese knowledge. And little things like that. I love how he put it. There's a 21-inch screen, and the all words section fills the whole screen. It's like, yeah, it's a pretty good way of feeling good about it. Just to recognize that moving forward. So great stuff, Kolia, and congratulations, you're doing great. Keep it up. Emma on Set the Scene for 8 of 13. She says, at this stage, every time we are recalling a movie, should we be actively trying to recall the scene? Some characters I do know already, but I do go through the scene anyway just to keep it active. My average time on each movie card on Anki at this point is about 4 to 5 minutes. Is this normal? Also, when reading, is it normal to pick apart some of the props you see in order to recall the scene? Like, how does it work for most people when you see a character that you recognize in order to recall? Just to add that I am really enjoying how this works and picking these sets and people to make films and scenes. It's really hard sometimes, but I am loving doing it. And to be able to remember each part of the character via props is just so clever. Okay, cool. So here's what I would say, Emma, and I think I already responded to you, but I just wanted to give other people a sense of what this is about. So spending 4 to 5 minutes on a card is a bit much, but that doesn't mean that here's how I like to think of it. You're prompted to write the character when you're given a flashcard. Now, suppose it comes up and you can just write the character, right? Well, consider that a success, because remember that the mnemonic scene is really just a bridge to get you from knowing nothing about the character to seeing the character a lot in context. So eventually you're going to reach the point where you're never going to forget a character. And that usually comes at the contextual level. So, for example, the most common character in Chinese, it's got the white paint can component, or perhaps a dove, and it's got the spoon component. Those are the 2 components in it, and it's the most common character in Chinese. So you could even probably not have a very good Hands of Movie Method scene for it and remember still. But the reason why you remember is because you see it so often in context that it crosses that threshold of never forgetting. So like, at some point, like I said, I just said the word threshold, for example. There was a point in my life where I didn't know how to use that word. And then at some point in my life, I saw it enough and produced it enough that it's like, now I understand what it means. And, I can use it in day-to-day parlance, and it's not going to leave my memory. So remember that that's going to happen for Chinese, for everything that you're learning. The Hands of Movie Method is really just a bridge to get you there. Now, as it happens, some of your scenes you'll remember forever because they just happen to be hitting all those points, in the same way that if you see a great scene in a movie, you remember it forever. So it is possible that you'll remember something forever, but if you don't and you can still produce the character, that's okay. Now, here's the other possibility. You're asked to produce the character for your flashcard and you cannot produce it, right? In that case, you do want to go back into your scene and make sure that you recall everything. But don't, it very well may be that the scene that you made just was enough to get you to remember it on the flashcard, and then your brain just killed it. It just remembered it quickly, and it goes, oh, okay, I got this. And then we show it to you in context, and then you remember. And so the fact that you can produce the character, when the flashcard comes up is enough. It meant that the scene was enough. It got you to the point where you can create it. Like, it's like, to some degree, you have to just judge the result. The card came up, the keyword and the pinyin came up, and you produced it. And so who cares whether or not you still remember the scene, because success, you did it. Now, if later you forgot it, like, 2 weeks later, the same card came up and you couldn't produce it this time. Okay, well then go back into the Hensa movie method, imagine yourself in the set, imagine yourself with that actor, and see, what you can do to improve it. With bearing in mind that you're going to know exactly what you need to improve. So you see that the keyword is 100, okay, and you see that it's pronounced by, B-A-I third tone. Okay, well, if you can't produce it, maybe you remember that there was a horizontal line at the top, but you can't remember what was below it, okay? So when you reveal the correct answer on the back of the card, you'll see, oh, it's the white component, the dove component that I was missing. So therefore, what I need to do is get Brad Pitt in the bedroom of my AI set and a razor blade, and make sure that the dove in the scene, or the white paint can, or whatever it was that represented the white component to you, make sure that's stronger. Like, just do something in the scene to make that clearer. And all you're doing is, like, a brick fell off and you're putting it back on, right? As opposed to forgetting everything about the scene, because you didn't forget everything about the scene. You know that your B actor is Brad Pitt. I mean, it might probably somebody else for you, but like, it could be. And then you know what your AI set is, and you know what the bedroom is. So all you have to do is make the scene better that way. Now, suppose it was the comprehension card, and it showed you the character, but you couldn't remember what it meant. Okay, well, you can remember that it was Brad Pitt in the bedroom with a razor blade and a white paint can, but you forgot that you had a bunch of $100 bills fall out of the paint can. So maybe this time you make it $100 bills falling out of the paint can, and they're all glowing, and they form a statue of Benjamin Franklin, who's the guy on the $100 bill. Like, it's just that you do something to make the meaning of the character more substantial in the scene. So what's nice about getting the flashcards wrong is that you should know exactly what was weak about your scene. Was it the actor? Was it the set? Was it the props? Was it the meaning of the character? And that should be clear to you by what you don't remember. And so here's my recommendation. Never spend more than really 30 seconds on a character. If you can't think of it within 30 seconds, you got it wrong, you have to improve your scene, fine. But if you can produce the character in under 30 seconds, then who cares whether or not you remember the whole scene? You succeeded in producing the character, so that's what you should do. So that's my recommendation for what to do regarding active recall. Good question here from Dan Malleck, and I like this because it's one of those questions that everybody's going to have. Like, so there's sort of a theme. I'll explain it after I read the comment. So Dan Malleck on the Living Links Logic of Chinese Word Learning Part 2. He says, I have to say this very long process for each word is really disconcerting. Spending so long coming up with a mnemonic for each character makes me want to go back to rote memorization, right? So this is the feeling that everybody gets at the beginning of each phase in regard to what the phase is focused on. So at phase 1, some people go, dang, this seems like a whole lot to learn a character. And so to Dan, I would ask, how do you feel about the Hensa movie method now? Because at this point, you're in level 8, and you've gone through many characters at this point, more than 50 characters. How do you feel about the Hensa movie method now? Do you still feel that it is too much to do for an individual character? And if you don't, bear in mind that the Hensa movie method is more complicated than what we do for words. So if you were able to learn it there, then you'll almost definitely be able to learn the Living Links logic in a similar amount of time. So there's that. But then in part 2, it's the Living Links logic, which, as we're making the lessons for it, I always have this feeling of like, I bet that people are going to think this takes long because it takes long to explain. But once you know how to do it, it doesn't take long at all to do. So it's like the process of explaining to you the mechanism of how the mnemonics work and what things you could add to it. Like, oh, you could try to do a sound mnemonic, or you could do a mnemonic that is just a memory from your life that's visually related to the concept here. And how do you find an image and all of that? Those are things that explaining them takes way longer than just doing them. So if I see the word dehua, hua, that reminds me of Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman, which again, me saying that reminds me of Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman is way longer than it takes me to just think of it. You know what I'm saying? Like, because I don't need to explain to anybody why something makes sense to me. I just do it, right? So then I go, duh, that's like the hua, right? So, that's like Al Pacino. He's putting together a set of possibilities on his speech in the end of Scent of a Woman. And he's going, this is one of my huas, the other hua, right? And so somehow I'm creating hypotheticals, which is what dehua does. It creates using Al Pacino from the end of Scent of a Woman saying the hua, which he always said in that. You know, that's all stuff I just came up with in the moment, and explaining it to you takes way longer than if I were just studying on my own, didn't have to explain anything to anyone, and we just went, haha, imagine this, right? And that probably all takes less than 10 seconds to come up with. And that's a sound mnemonic. And so at this point, you're hearing us explain everything and give lots of detailed explanations, but we're just trying to give you the options. And then you pull out your mnemonic cheat sheet. And I remember I said this in one of the videos. I was like, print it out. It's like 10 pages long, and just go through it and flip through the pages as you're learning a character. And then what happens is that after you've done this like 10 to 15 times with 10 to 15 words, you start to just get it right away. And you'll notice that people have left comments in the Vocab Unlocked lessons in the foundation course that are really getting into this. And there's loads of them. And there's just people leaving lots of kind of ideas. And then you even just get ideas from other people, and that takes even less time. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. It's a normal feeling. What you're feeling is totally understandable. And I've had that too. I've gone like, geez, this seems like a lot to do just to learn a character or a word. And then of course in phase 3, what people will sometimes have is, phase 3 is probably the easiest one for people because they're so excited that they can even learn or read sentences without pinyin that they'll get over their sense of it being difficult. But it is difficult. Like, don't kid yourself. It's pretty tough. So, but it's the toughest at the beginning of phase 3. And what you're doing now is the toughest from the beginning of phase 2. So that's my recommendation for that for Dan. Next, we have Thomas Brand on level 37 complete. He says, he was wondering about some, learning the vocab boost lessons and all of that. So he says, I appreciate the hints, and I've applied these methods quite effectively to the 1,000 or so words taught in the foundation course. Phil's instructions at the video at the beginning of this level were to just read the sentences and move on, not to go through the mnemonic and card adding procedures for each one. It may be that I'm unusually dim. Are most course users able to understand and recall each of these new words reliably after seeing them once? So here's the thing. Once you get into the intermediate course, you're starting to get to the point where immersion is a lot more effective than it used to be. When you first start off in the foundation course, it's really hard to understand any of the things you're trying to immerse yourself in. We give as many suggestions as we can, but you just got to learn a certain, critical mass of characters, which I would say is about 592, the 80% of the language that is a bifrequency, before you can start to have a lot of recognition in any given piece of immersion material. And obviously there's immersion material that's still, easier to understand at level 37 than it will, and, more advanced material that'll be easier to understand later, but just there's so many more options. And so what we want to try to discourage is to get too caught up in flashcard sentences, because flashcard sentences are Chinese and they're a form of immersion, but they're so targeted. And there's, if you potentially were able to listen to a lot of immersion material, you could get way more comprehensible moments than you could if you just used flashcard sentences. I got too addicted to flashcard sentences, and it kind of slowed me down in my acquisition process. So what we're trying to get you to understand is that most of your acquisition is going to come from your immersion, and the sentences in the course are meant to prime your brain. Oftentimes when you first read a sentence, you don't totally get it, but you've set yourself up to get it, if that makes sense. Like you've sort of seen it, you've gone, okay, I can understand mostly what the sentence means. I maybe don't totally understand it, but I've given my brain a pattern to recognize that will come up again in my immersion at some point. And, you can't always predict exactly when it's going to happen. Many times it happens very quickly after. You read something in a book and you're like, I don't totally get what that word is. And then you keep reading and then you realize, oh, this word is like a special thing that's related to this story, or it's just a noun that I hadn't seen before, but they mentioned that same noun 3 times on this page, and now I get it through context. Or there's all sorts of stuff that can happen if you just keep going with the immersion. So I want to simultaneously hold 2 thoughts in my head, and basically you should judge your mood, because I don't want to also discourage you from making up an image and adding it to a sentence card if you find it compelling, right? So if you're in the right mood, you're in a more study-based mood, and you want to get to the bottom of a word and try to get to what it means, and so you're going to do your Google image search and try to find the word itself, that's totally fine. I don't want to discourage that either, but I do want to get you to understand that immersion in the wider world is where you're going to get really good at Chinese. And the Mandarin Blueprint sentences are mostly just meant to prime you for that world. Now, you can add many of those cards to your flashcards if you want, or you can just read them on Kajabi once, read them on Traverse/Anki once, and then don't put them in your flashcard reviews, because again, you're going to run across all these concepts over and over. And that's really hard to understand when you're first starting, because it's all your first exposure to these words. So you're like, well, how do I know I'm going to see them again? But like, I promise you, from where I'm standing with my Chinese immersion level and where I'm at, I know that all of this stuff comes up over and over and over, and you have many opportunities to see it. And of course, a lower frequency word comes up less often than a high frequency word by definition. But if you're really immersing yourself a lot, then those low frequency words you do end up hearing them many times a day. So this is all that's what we're trying to get at here with the don't focus too much on all the different words. Next, we have Ann Giles on Make a Movie for Xiang. She says 2 questions. In English, when comparing 2 things, some things are considered similar and some things are considered interchangeable. A simile expresses a comparison between 2 things that are similar, often using like or as. Like anger is like a full hot horse, and fluent as the sea. A metaphor expresses the idea that 2 things are each other. Juliet is the sun. Does this concept that some things are like each other versus some things are each other exist in Chinese? And the answer to this question actually relates to the answer to the second question. She says, when comparing 2 things as like each other, it seems as if we have 2 choices, 一样 or 像. And so really what's happening here is that 像 and 一样 get used in context together all the time. Now, if you say 你很像你爸爸, that means you resemble your dad. And that's like a really simple way to describe something that technically that's not even a metaphor or simile. It's just saying you resemble your father. So it is possible to use 像 without 一样. But if you were to compile all the sentences that use 像, I bet that the majority of them are either 像 something 一样 or 像 something 是的. There's another, it's not the 是as in to be or not to be 是. It's a different 是that means like similar to. So if you say 像你爸爸是的, that would mean like similar to your dad, or 像你爸爸一样, in the same way as your dad. But it's a simile in that sense. If you use 像, it's more like, it's not necessarily like a simile as in, what's a good example here? 你像地震一样愤怒. You're as angry as an earthquake. So like that would be an example of a simile, right? But it could just be like 你像你爸爸一样学习, which would mean like you study just like your father, in the same way as your father, right? So that's fair, like that would be the kind of thing that's just like making a comparison that's saying it's in the same way as or similar to whatever the object is. And so if that object is something that's not human, then it's probably more like a simile in that sense. But if it is a person, you're just making a comparison. It's like you study like he does, or you work like he does, or you're funny like he is, right? And I guess you could say that's a simile in some sense. But usually we think of similes and metaphors as being a bit more abstract, like, he is as beautiful as a lake or something. But anyway, so then the question was, what about metaphors in Chinese? And that's actually quite simple. You just say something is something else in the same way you do in English. So Juliet is the sun, I don't know what the transliteration of Juliet is, but it's probably like Juliette or something like that, like Juliette or something maybe. And so Juliette 是太阳, right? Juliet is the sun. And so if that were you would just say 是, Juliet 是太阳. Right. And so like that would be fine. Obviously, I've always found that metaphors in English sound a little bit strange if you just look at them out of context. It's like, Juliet is the sun. It's like, no, she's not. She's a person. But like, but when you say Juliet is like the sun, then you get it more quickly. But, that's just in Chinese, if you want to say is like something or acts in the same way as, you say 像 object 一样. Right. So, cool. So that's basically the difference there. If you just say, and by the way, you can also use 一样 by itself, and that's just saying literally something is the same. 我的想法和他的一样, right? My opinion is the same as hers. It's not like the same as hers. It's not like you couldn't say that. You could say like, 我的想法像他一样, but maybe your point there is to say, but there's a slight difference. Like we're mostly the same. It's very similar, but it's in the same way, but I have a slight addendum or something, right? But generally, if you want to just say, my opinion is the same as hers, you wouldn't use 像. You just say, 我的想法和他的一样, right? So it's the same. The comparison I'm making is that my opinion and her opinion are the same, right? So that's also fine as well. But when you use 像 and 一样 together, then yeah, you're saying it's a simile type of thing, or you're just saying it's in the same way as. Cool. All right. Kolia on 江 in context. He said, this reminds me of the amazing Chinese TV show 大江大河, aka Like a Flowing River, which I would recommend to anyone wanting to practice their Chinese and learn about China during the economic reform period, the end of the 1970s to the 90s. It's available on YouTube, even with English subtitles. And yeah, you can challenge yourself not to watch it with English subtitles, but yeah, 大江大河 is, of course, 江 and 河 both mean river. So in this case, they're just sort of saying, big river, but just using the two different words for it. And they translate as like a flowing river. And yeah, that is a very fascinating topic. The economic reform period in China is one of those things that, my personal opinion about all of that is that there really was a major shift in China that is about as big as if their government had completely changed in terms of the government policy change. Like technically they remained under the name of the Chinese Communist Party. And, maybe that's had some lasting effects. They didn't change the name and they didn't change they didn't consider it a coup. But I tell you something, Deng Xiaoping is the guy who was involved in the economic reform, the leader of China at that time, who did the great 改革开放, the reform and opening up policy that they're still rolling out to this day, by the way. It was a 50-year-long policy. He actually showed up with the army after Hua Guofeng was, so Mao died in 1976. Hua Guofeng became the interim president for 2 years, and then Deng Xiaoping took over. Deng Xiaoping arrived with the army at Tiananmen Square, basically saying, I'm taking over. I mean, it was like, it was a coup in everything but name. So But he was a pragmatist, so he said, we're not going to change the name of the government. We're not going to say that we're like the capitalist party of China now, because nobody will go for that. He even did things like, we're not going to call it a free market economy. We're going to call it a goods economy, because he was a pragmatist. He knew that you couldn't have this long history of basically singing the praises of everything economic communism and then suddenly be like, oops, we were totally wrong. Like people won't go for that. You need to soften the blow a little bit. And, obviously they have maintained certain policies that you would consider to be on the communist end of the spectrum, but like clearly economically they opened things up massively, and that changed the wealth of the country. And so it's a very, very fascinating thing to see what happened from 79 through the 90s to make it, this economic miracle as we all know it today. So definitely great to have suggestions like that from Kolia. And any of you want to give recommendations for immersion material, some of the best type of recommendation you can give people, because it's like little wins they get throughout the day. Next, we have Brian O'Connor on level 13 complete. He says, bravo on level 13, guys. So helpful and so much fun. Hard work too, but enjoyable work, which is the key to perseverance. My only wish was that we had already made movies for the top-down words that were used most often in level 13. I would have loved to have had already ta, zai, and ni in my movies, for example. But the good thing is I can now read these, although I can't remember how to write them yet. Yeah, so this is interesting. So, of course, when we were designing this course, this is the thing that we were banging our heads against the wall in the early stages. The hardest part of the course to make was definitely the first 30 levels, right? Because you see so many characters and you're like, oh, that's such an essential character. But you have to take into account that you can't just, like, so for example, if we put the 10 most frequent characters as the first 10 characters in the course, that would involve learning, I believe it was 18 different components. So learning 18 components just to learn 10 characters, you have to spread out the components a bit more, because that would turn people off massively. Like imagine that you're like learning all of these different components and the next character you learn feels like it has no relation to the previous character you learned because it's a set of new components, right? You need the components to have some degree of connection so that you can feel, okay, I learned this component, then I used it in this character, and this character, and this character, and this character, and now I really have a relationship with it and we're all good. But what can happen if you only do it off of components, which is my criticism of the Heisig method, is that he would have complicated characters from a component perspective come up very late in his book, even though they're super common characters, like top 100 characters in the language. He'd have them coming up over 1,000 characters in, and that to me is too far in the other direction. So we tried to balance those, but of course that's why things like ni, ta, and zai weren't necessarily in level 13. Zai is going to come up in level 14, and I think ta comes up in level 15. But the point is, you do actually recognize them, right? So if you see them a lot, and you can now read them and recognize them, then when you learn them through the Henzi movie method, you're quickly going to not only know how to write it and all that, but you've already seen it in context, so it's easier to learn from there. So top down, is not it's not like there's nothing you can learn top down. We've talked about this ad nauseum, but it's like, the problem with top down learning is that it doesn't take very long into it before you're overwhelmed by the amount of information there is, and it's not based enough in a foundation, so therefore you forget lots of it. But what you don't forget is the stuff that's super, super frequent. And words like ta, the word for the pronoun he, him, or she, her, and all that. And then ni, the pronoun for you, or zai, the pronoun for at, like your location. I guess it's not more preposition. But it's a point being that, like, if you can learn certain things top down, then when you learn them bottom up, it just expedites the process. Ronald Kirshner on It's a Word for Dan. He says, may I ask a question about how the MB system is supposed to work? We just learned the character for Daybreak, so we developed a movie scene for this character. Then we made a prop from that character. In this case, it was a rooster. At this early stage of learning, when I see a character in a sentence or even in flashcards, I sometimes have to stop and think about the meaning of the character. As I conjure up the meaning, would the MB method dictate that I think of the movie scene that built the character, or would it be a prop that the character becomes? Rooster. I understand this is not as formalistic as I described, and I also understand that at some point there will be no thinking. However, I'm interested how you would have us build our character recognition. As always, thank you for your wonderful product. Well, here's some ways to think about this. So, I mean, at this stage, it's a word for Dan. You're not yet even to the point where you're using things in sentences. I mean, obviously we have example sentences there, but we specifically tell you don't worry too much about them, just take a look at them, whatever. Now, you might unlock a word like 但是. So that's a 2 characters, right? Now, if you didn't remember the 2 characters, you could say, all right, well, let's do the memory of the 2 scenes. But for the most part, that's not going to be too necessary, and you can't necessarily use a prop for every character because not every character is a prop. So yeah, Dan for Daybreak becomes a prop in the next character, which is also pronounced Dan and means but. But the character Dan that means but, B-U-T, is not a prop, right? That never gets used as a prop in other characters. So you can't, the suggestion you said there, would it be the prop that the character becomes a rooster that you try to remember? That doesn't apply to every character, so you couldn't apply that across the board. But generally speaking, I don't think you need to do that. I think that the movie scene is to remember how to produce the character, and then the word card is more about comprehension. It's more about seeing it and recognizing it and remembering what it means. And then when you've done this with enough characters and words, we then challenge you to say, okay, what if you did it with 6 characters and words in this simple sentence, 6 characters and 3 words in this simple sentence. And then at that point, you start to use the recognition you had, the comprehension you had from the word card, and try to use that comprehension and apply it to the sentence, right? But no, you would, suppose you had a 6 character sentence. Our instruction would not be to remember your Hands Movie Method scene for each character. It would be to try to remember the words in the sentence. So if you're going to go one step back, you remember the words. So here's another way you could think of it. There's layers to the language. There's the pronunciation and pinyin. That's like sort of your first thing you learn. And then you learn the characters, and then you learn the words, and then you learn the words in simple sentences, right? And so our thinking is never go more than one layer back to try to understand what's going on with the sentence. So like if you have a sentence or the word, right? So if you're at a word and you don't remember something, go one layer back to the Hands Movie Method and try to remember what the scene was. If you're at a sentence and you don't understand something, try to go back to the word level and see if you can understand the word, right? So don't jump 2 layers down and go to the Hands Movie Method from there. So that's what I would say, ways of thinking about it for Ronald. And also, you're absolutely right, Ronald. You're going to get the hang of this stuff, and these questions will, they'll just feel like, oh, those are the questions I had when I was in phase 2, but that a lot of that stuff works itself out naturally. Philip Dong on Duo in Context. Hi, Luke and Phil. In lesson 22, the sentence 他对这件事不想多说 can it be written as 他对这件事不想说得多 instead? So no, not really, because the 说得多, first of all, it would be the different 的 there. It would be the 的 that comes after verbs to indicate how the verb happened. So 说 means speak, 说得多 means speak a lot. He spoke, or speaking a lot, right? Now, usually, the way you're going to see that is in a comparison. So, 我对这件事比他说的多得多, or 说得多, that would mean I spoke more than he did, right? But that's a comparison. So, if you're just saying 他对这件事不想多说, that's just a statement of the fact that he doesn't want to speak too much about this issue, right? And so you can put 多 in front of any verb, not literally any verb, but like many verbs in order to indicate doing that verb a lot, right? So 说 is something that you can do a lot of, and so But he doesn't want to do that in this case, so 他对这件事不想多说. Yeah, that'd be, so like, if you're going to use 说得多, it needs to be in a comparison and saying that the comparison was, there was a big difference in this case. Brennan Pimpinella on Make a Movie for Su. He said, but he says his question is actually unrelated to the Make a Movie for Su. He says, I'm currently shadowing a virtual audit in China with work. The audit is being performed entirely in Mandarin, and I am picking up on something that I have a question about. When someone is reading a string of numbers out loud, for example, 202 0000 5193, the 1 is not pronounced E first tone. So it would be 20200005193. And so they're saying yao, but I can't grasp if it is yao first tone or second, it's first tone. Would that be how you say 1 if it's in a string of numbers, say a serial number, like how 2 of something is liang and not r? Or could it be the case that it's just another way to say 1? Yeah, you're exactly right, Brennan. This is how you say 1 in a string of numbers, and the reason for this is to distinguish it from qi. So qi is, of course, how you say 7, and yes, it is different from i, but because they share the same final, qi, i, qi, i, it's possible that you'll mishear it. But if you say yao, then you're fine. So 2020005193, right? So that's how you would say the number 1 in a string of numbers. So good job for recognizing that. Ómar Yasin on go in context. In the second sentence, 有一只狗从门口走过来, is 从 here indicating that the dog came from or away from the door. So it's definitely saying it came from the door, but came because 走过来, right? So it's not away from the door. That would be 走过去. If I said 有一只狗从门口走过去, right? So that would mean here we are, we see the 门口, and there's a dog, and it from the door, it was sitting at the door, from the door, it walked away. That's why we'd use 走过去. But if we say 走过来, 有一只狗从门口走过来, starting from the door and it's walking towards us, right? So the 从 just indicates where the 走过来 started from. So that's how that works. Chris Young on 最近 in context. He says, what's the function of / meaning of 过的 in 你最近过得怎么样? If I take those characters out, I get the general meaning of the sentence, but I'm struggling to get what these add. So, 过 is a verb meaning to experience or go through something. 的 is the character you add after a verb to indicate how it went. And actually, you can pretty much say anything, any verb plus 的 plus 怎么样 to ask how it went. So, 比赛跑得怎么样? How did you run in the competition, right? Maybe if you want to be even more specific, you say 跑赛, which would mean a race, but 比赛 is just a competition, general word for competition. But 他昨天说得怎么样? How did he speak yesterday? But if there's a noun, 昨天的演讲, so the speech, 昨天的演讲, the yesterday's speech, 昨天的演讲, 过得怎么样? So 过得 is like a general thing you can say about whatever you put before it. So, 前天的路程过得怎么样? So how did the journey go a couple days ago? 前天 is 2 days ago, day before yesterday. And so, like, as an example, right, I'm just trying to come through, you could put any kind of event in, 上周的活动过得怎么样? Last week's event, how did it go? How did last week's event go? So basically saying 过得怎么样 is saying, how did it go? How did X go, right? And 最近, so recently, that's the event we're talking about. And then the question is 过得怎么样? Now, if you say 你最近怎么样, that's, pretty much the same thing. And it's, it's fine to ask. It's practically the same. But by saying 你最近过得怎么样, you're making it clear. You're saying, how has it been going? Like, that's the going part of it, right? The experience, how's it been? So, like, that's how you can think of it. But the key to take out of this, though, is you can put pretty much anything there then say 过得怎么样? And you've got the question. And then you go, 我最近过得很好，跑赛过得很差。The 活动过得很顺利。Right? The event went very smoothly, right? 过得很 adjective, right? So 过得怎么样? 过得很 adjective, right? It's a very common phrase you can use in Chinese, and you'll hear it all the time now that I pointed it out. Chris Young on 后来 in context. In this sentence, 后来他们生了一只小狗，我叫它小白。Would the last part more accurately be I call it Little White, as in that's the name I gave the puppy when it was born, and how I call it now, as opposed to 我叫了它小白, I called it Little White, meaning that's how I named it when it was born. What I'm getting at is whether there's a le after 叫 implied in the original sentence, because we established that we're talking about the past and the whole text is about the past, so we can leave it out. Or if we're currently talking about the puppy and only the bit about the birth is in the past, in which case the last part is present. I know this is getting into the weeds, but I feel like I can understand the basic meaning of sentences now, so I'm trying to get some of the nuances. Yeah, well, what we know here is 后来 is how you say the next thing that happened in a story. That's the way I like to think of 后来. You're telling someone a story, maybe about what happened yesterday, but you're telling somebody a story and you're saying this happened and then that happened, but it's all happened. So, and then 后来 this happened. Now, 他们生了一只小狗，我叫它小白. Now, really the answer to this is that it could be either, you could say, I call it Little White still, or you could say I called it Little White at the time, right? And so that's fine. And also bear in mind that earlier in the sentence we have a look. We have 他们生了一只小狗. And sometimes when you have a le in the sentence, you don't need to have a second one to indicate that, yeah, we're just talking about the completed actions of this time, and I'm telling a story about the past. Chinese is very contextual, so it's important not to linger too long on these types of questions, because that's not what happens in the end. You don't end up thinking about this stuff long enough, and then because I thought about it so long, now I produce it well. No. You just see enough of it, and then when the time comes to produce something and you're telling a story, and you say, 后来他们生了一只小狗，我叫了它小白, or 我叫它小白, you just say what feels right. And to be honest, both of them feel right to me. So it's kind of like, it's just one of those things where it makes sense to translate it as I called it Little White or I call it Little White. Both are actually okay. So, yeah, of course you're talking about the past. You can leave out the le sometimes when you're talking about the past. Next, we have Micaela Ellison on 名字 in context. She's bringing up this sentence. 不过我只记得有些人的名字，另外一些人就不记得了. When I first read the sentence, I thought le would be pronounced liao, but I realized that if that were the case, the sentence would likely be 另外一些人的就记不了了. So can I also say it that way? Well, it would have a different meaning. 就记不了. Yeah, that would be a different meaning. So the first sentence is but I only remembered a few people's names. Other people, I don't remember. And 我就不记得了 means I, was exposed to this is a very common thing with names, right? Like it's like, hi, this is Brian, Gary, Joanna, and Larry. And so you just remembered Joanna and Larry, and you forgot Brian and Gary because it was too quick. So there was a moment where you remembered them, but then you forgot, you don't remember them anymore, so 不记得了, right? But 另外一些人的就记不了，另外一些人的就记不了. That would mean there is no way for me to remember their names. Those people, it's impossible for me to remember their names. Because remember, the 不的 infix is about the result not being able to be achieved. And 了, when it's pronounced that way, means like to finish up or be able to do, essentially. So it's like, 记不了 would mean those people, I'm just unable to remember their names for whatever reason. And so it doesn't really make sense, because why would you be able to remember some people's names, but you can't, you just aren't capable of remembering these certain. So the difference is subtle, but it is big enough that it would be wrong. Next, we have two questions, one from Mirko on fun in context and one from Micaela on 认真 in context, which are actually the same question. So Mirko says, I have a question regarding 把面包平均分成两份儿. Pleco tells me that 平均 is an adjective, so why is it not 把面包平均的分成两份儿? So that would mean like, 平均的分成. So that's the use of 的 in between an adjective and a verb to indicate how the verb was done, right? And then Micaela Ellison on 认真 in context says, 你一定要认真工作. This appears to be adjective plus verb combination, but I'm thinking it's not because there's no 的. Is 工作 actually a noun here? So basically what they're noting is that you can put an adjective before a verb, and often you can omit the 的. And so it's because again, Chinese is so about efficiency a lot of the time. So if you can, for example, 认真工作, that's such a common phrase. And first of all, it's not wrong in either of these situations to add the 的 back in. 你一定要认真的工作. 认真的工作. Fine. 认真工作 is also fine because what probably just happened was people were saying 认真的工作, 认真的工作 so much that people just started the 的 just started to drop because it was such a common phrase, 认真工作. And then, 平均分成两份儿. So it's just sort of got this, like, there's nothing else that it could be, really. You can't say even divide into. It's evenly divide into, right? So the 的, it may be left out, but it's still the only thing that makes sense, right? So 平均分成, so evenly divide into. That's basically what 平均分成 means. So 分成两份儿 would mean separate or divide into two parts, but do it evenly. 平均分成两份儿. And that's fine. You can just leave out the 的 because it's pretty obvious from the context as it is. But it's good to notice it. I like that two people noticed it on separate sentences and went, wait, shouldn't it be following this rule? And again, what you should take from this is sometimes you can break this rule. But it's good that you knew the rule and saw it being broken, you know what I mean? So that you can learn that, yeah, sometimes you can leave out the 的. You can omit the 的 in that situation. Micaela on 问题 in context. She says, 你有什么问题吗? I thought you could also simply say 你有问题吗? If so, is there any difference in meaning? Well, I mean, sure, there definitely could be. If I say to somebody 你有问题吗? It's kind of like, you got a problem? Right? It could very well be interpreted that way. But if I say 你有什么问题吗? I'm saying, do you have any questions? Right? Technically a yes or no question. It's, do you have any questions? I'm not saying... Now, if I say 你有什么问题呢? Then what I'm saying is, what are your questions? I'm not asking if you have any. You must have some in my mind when I'm saying it. What are they? Right? Then it's not a yes or no question. But if I'm saying 你有什么问题吗? What I'm asking is, it's possible you don't have any questions. So the first thing I'm going to establish is, do you have any questions? And suppose if you answer 有, then I will say, 那你有什么问题呢? Which would mean, what are your questions, right? So by saying 你有问题吗? Like that could be, do you have a question? Well, first of all, that the other thing that's a little bit different about it is if I say 你有问题吗? Even if I'm not saying it aggressively, like I'm not saying you got a problem, but if I'm just saying it, do you have a question? It's a question. 你有问题吗? It's like 你有什么问题吗? Makes it clear that it's like, do you have any questions? And it's a sort of plurality of them because 什么 is either what or it's a pronoun for any, right? So in this case, it's a pronoun for any because it doesn't end in n. It's a yes or no question. So it's, do you have any questions? And in that case, it's plural. Micaela Ellison on 真 in context. Is 真的 a compound word? I recall people using it often as a response, similar to saying really after someone makes a statement. Yeah, so you can just reply 真的. And by saying 真的 or 真的吗, right? Both of those are fine. Then you're basically saying it's a bit of an oddity because, 真 is an adjective, and by saying 真的, like, I don't know, 真的宝石, it's a real gem, or 真的黄金, real gold, not fake gold. So it's a kind of 真的假的, 真的假的, like that's the real or fake, right? But when you just have it on its own and you just go 真的, that can either be like, if I said 真的 to you, and like what I'm asking is really, and you could respond 真的, meaning really. So it's funny how you could actually say the same word. Now, the reason why we don't call it a compound word in the context of 真 getting unlocked in the course is because when it's used as an adjective, 真的喜欢他, like, or like a adverb in that case, it's really 真 plus 的 tying it to the next character. So in that case, it's really just 真 by itself being a word. But yeah, you can use 真的. But like 真的 is really just short for like, 真的情况, like this is a real situation, or 真的现实, an actual reality or something like that. It's just, you always pretty much leave out 情况 or 现实because it's just implied always. So, yeah. But if in your output for the time being, you prefer to say 真的吗 to say really, that's fine as well. Totally can say that. 真的吗, right? Really? Is that true? True or not, right? And so, but people even, like, it's just Chinese compresses things so often. So, even 真的吗 got changed to 真的, right? So, yeah. Seantay Hall on 手机 in context. In this sentence, 你看,这是我才买的手机. I would have naturally used 刚买的. Is this okay? Are they completely interchangeable? Yeah, in this case, in this context, they're pretty much the same. And so, tai can be used in different contexts to mean different things. And but 刚, in this case, 这是我刚买的手机. Yeah, either are okay. Saying 我才买的手机 feels sooner in the past. So it feels like you just walked out of the store and your friend was there. And you're like, 你看,这是我才买的手机. 我刚买的手机. It feels as though the frame of time could be longer. It would seem strange if 3 days or a week after buying it, you said 才买的. Or 这是我刚才买的手机. There's something about using 才 that makes it feel very close in time. But saying 刚 has a longer period where it fits. 刚 is more like just how you feel about it. This is still my new phone. 我刚买的手机. And so 刚, I would say they're interchangeable in the sense of the meaning doesn't change too much. It's just a longer time frame, really. And yeah. I sent Seantay in phase 4, we have adverbs of time, and I explain in that article there's explanations of 刚才 and 刚刚. Kim Thomas on Vocab Unlocked from 纸. With this sentence, 在中国吃饭时用的是筷子不是手指. I'm confused by 使用的. Is it time and time? No, it's just you're breaking down the sentence in the wrong spot. So it's 在中国吃饭时用的是筷子, right? So in China, when eating, you use chopsticks, not your fingers, right? And so yeah, that's just a classic, you were cutting the sentence, so you're going 食用. And so that 食用的, yeah, that's not where the sentence divides. Now, with that in mind, with 在 activity, 时, you're basically saying when doing that activity, right? So 在中国吃饭时, 在吃饭时, or you say 在, let's just stick with 吃饭, 在吃饭的时候, 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 or 在吃饭时. It's one of those two. Saying 在 activity 时 is a little bit more formal, and 在 activity 的时候 is a little bit more spoken. That's how people will say it most of the time. But it's not. What's interesting about it is that you only ever use the 的 if you're saying the full 时候. If you take out the 后 part of 时候, then it's going to be just 时 by itself. 在吃饭时,在中国吃饭时,在中国吃饭的时候,用的是筷子. Right? So that's how that works. Philip Dong on 多 in context. Hi, Luke and Phil. In level 22, the sentence 这里环境很好,多少人想来呢? The sentence shows it as the environment is really great here. Loads of people are wanting to come. I translate 多少 as how many, so would it be okay to say 这里环境很好,很多人想来呢? Yeah, 很多人想来呢 is okay. 多少 means how many or several, right? So it's just like 几个. So like 几个 is means a few or how many and usually less than 10, right? So it's like, that's how 几个 works. If you get higher than 10, then it's 多少 means how many, and your assumption is that it's higher than 10. And then 多少 can also mean several, and its assumption is higher than 10. So 多少人想来呢? Right? Like 这里环境很好,多少人想来呢? Like just several people want to come. Lots of people want to come. It's kind of how that works. And so loads of people, that type of thing. And so in this case, because it's not a question, it's pretty clear it means several, right? You're not asking how many people want to come here. You're making a statement. You're like, oh, the environment's great here. 这里环境很好,多少人想来呢? Right? So like so many people want to come here, right? It's got that feeling. Mirko on 到 in context. 到了公园,我看到了臭臭正穿着红色的大衣在和别人拍照. I don't understand the function of 正. Does 正穿着 mean something like at the time wearing? Thanks in advance. Yeah, you got it. I mean, 正 and 正在 and 在 are all interchangeable really to mean currently happening, and 这 is also a currently happening indicator. So you could write 我看到了臭臭穿着红色的大衣在和别人拍照. So this is a kind of complicated sentence because it's saying while wearing the red coat, so it's like there's two things happening at once. She's wearing the red coat, that's the thing that's happening, and also taking photos with other people. 在和别人拍照, right? So 正 just means 正穿着. Currently wearing, 正穿着. Currently wearing the 红色的大衣. Right? So that's how that works. So with that in mind, that covers all the questions from this bi-weekly Mandarin Blueprint podcast. Keep an eye out for any announcements that may be coming out over the next 2 weeks. I don't know exactly when we'll have the upper intermediate course and advanced course to the public, but the good news is that the beta tests so far have been going pretty well. We've had some recommendations from people about how to improve Traverse, but we're not having any major functionality issues. It's mostly just like things like nice to haves that we could add. With that in mind, we'll see you in 2 weeks. Luke will see you here in 2 weeks. And head over to mandarinblueprint.com to learn more about how you can learn Mandarin in a fraction of the time that was ever possible before using the Mandarin Blueprint method. See you next time.